Hello and welcome to the story of C.G. Voltz. Christian G. Voltz, he's first and foremost, professionally, he's a maltster or a hopsmeister and certainly a brewer. He was born in 1845 in Oppenweier, Germany. He emigrates to the United States and straight to Buffalo, New York in 1850. This passport application, done up in 1890, describes him as 5'9", high forehead, hazel eyes, blonde hair, and a blonde face. The first mention through my research is it comes from the publication 100 Years of Brewing, and this was released in August of 1901. And this mentions Christian in 1863. Mr. Voltz entered the employ of John G. Weidenbauer, who had been an employee of Mr. McLeish, and is therefore one of the oldest practical merchant maltsters in length of service in the United States. So right off the bat, it's pretty impressive. By 1863, Mr. Voltz is the oldest practical merchant maltster in the United States, right here in Buffalo. And now 1865, the city directory shows him as a bookkeeper for Hartball and Hart. And Hartball and Hart are a plumbing and gas fitting company. 1866, we see the first instance of the Voltz brothers as grocers on Main and Allen, and this is Anthony and John. These are Christian's older brothers. And again, the 1866, the next year he's listed as a bookkeeper. Still there. It does not say Hartball and Hart at this point. 1869, just a quick small advertisement for Voltz Brothers on 935 Main Street, Main opposite Allen. Here's a little bit of thievery. Here's a little thievery that happened over there at the grocery store, and then a little advertisement there in the bottom. And I'll show you the 1870 or perhaps the 1872 map. This is, if you notice Massachusetts Ave and Essex Street, you will see a city lot, A. Liebolt. And this is the lot where Christian will eventually build the family home at 519 Massachusetts and his barn, 51 Essex. Now, in 1871, however, we see Anthony Diebolt. He is with the firm Diebolt and Company, and he is living at 392 Franklin. And we see Diebolt, Voltz and Company Distillers, 73 Main. And the proprietors of that business are Anthony Diebolt and Christian G. Voltz. And Anthony Diebolt is Christian's wife's father. So Christian marries Mary Diebolt, and Anthony Diebolt is Mary's father. And they are working together for Diebolt Voltz Company Distillers. And then here we see the 1875 on the right. This is the 1875 city directory. Lists Christian as a maltster, again, working out of that same 73 Main Street, and at the time now 1875, living at 289 Virginia. And here we see 392 Franklin Street for D. Voltz and Company. And again, Anthony Diebolt was living upstairs from this. And here at 289, this is where Christian and the family were living in 1871. Now, in 1876, we still see him as a maltster in the city directory, still living on Virginia. He is a secretary for the Buffalo Catholic Institute at the time, and sad news from the Voltz family is that C.G. and Mary, they lose their 4-month-old infant son, Alfred. In 1880, he is now, they are now operating under C.G. and J.S. Voltz with John, his brother, at 30 Prime, which is where the arena is downtown, and he's living out of 175 10th Street, and he's the secretary for the 7th Ward Seymour and Blair Club. And he is attempting to get out Democratic voters to vote. And if they do, they get a uniform for free. So 1882, as certainly a leader in the malting business and the hopsmeisting business, here he is and his brother testifying to a congressional tariff commission discussing the tariffs on barley and wheat and grains. And so just a small exchange here. It says, you've been engaged for some time in this business. Yes, sir, as salesman and maltster for 20 years. So here he is. He's given himself back to 1862. And we know that when he originally started here, they gave him the date of 1863. He's working for a plumber in 1865. Here we take it to 1887. We have what is still C.G. and J.S. Voltz & Co. And 1877, this is an 1887 publication here, and it mentions in 1877 C.G. and his brother J.S., present proprietors of the International Brewery. Now, there's a lot of international, there seems to be not a lot, there are a couple international breweries that name gets bounced around. And I don't know if they at one time were present proprietors of International Brewery, because I think that from 1871 on, it was owned by Jacob Shue, a good friend of the Voltz family. So anyway, in 1880, they do erect their own buildings on Niagara Street, and the structure extends 60 by 100 feet and 6 stories high. So that's 2 city lots wide and 6 stories high. Pretty impressive. And then this says C.G. Voltz was engaged in the malting business 14 years prior to the establishment of this house, which is in 1880, which brings us back to 1866. So here it says around 1884, they changed the business name to the International Malt House. So you will see that name now pop up if you're looking for any information on these some of these brewers. Here you see the International Railroad crossing out of Black Rock onto Squaw Island, and then away she goes. And there you see the International Malt House, which certainly looks about 6 stories high, and some ads for a sleigh. And then here they're what I assume they're selling flour siftings, or whatever they're sweeping up at the end of the night. Maybe feed your horse. And then 1888, here's the permit request to build their 2-story dwelling at Massachusetts and Essex for $7,000. And at the time, they are still, so obviously they're working out of the International Malt House on Niagara, and Christian and the family are living at 731 Prospect Avenue, which is still there. And here we see some blueprints. Over here on the right is the second floor of the house on 519 Massachusetts that was done up, if you notice, for Laura J. Voltz, who is the daughter of Christian and Mary. That would be the granddaughter of Anthony D. Voltz. And so I just kind of wonder if maybe that's what was happening over here, is that this is Anthony D. Voltz's lot, and he lets the family and lets Christian build the house on there. I don't know, maybe saying it's got to stay in the D-Volt family. So over here on the left, you do see the blueprints from 1926, where Laura has the house divided up into multi-units. And here are pictures of 519 and 51 Essex. That would be the Christian Voltz family house and the barn in the back. And 1891, we see the first instance of his house there on the corner of Massachusetts and Essex, with the brick barn behind. And in 1893, we see Anthony D. Voltz living at 519. He's moved in with the family after they have 4 years after they have built 519 Massachusetts. And 1894, we get a more honest representation of what the house was originally shaped at. And then, of course, the brick barn in the back. And these maps, these both were Hopkins maps, and these are both good for the firehouses, certainly. So when they got a call, they knew what they were getting into. In 1894, this is a nice little snippet that arrives in the paper, the Buffalo News, and there's a clergyman, there's a reverend who's upset with this cosmopolitan bazaar that they're throwing. And so Christian's not having it. And he says, first of all, let me inquire, who is the Reverend George Searcher? Whence he came, he who dares to insult my children, and through them me, their father. Let me call your attention to some of the ladies who in costume took part at the bazaar. There was Mrs. John C. Dingens, first matron, who is an aunt to my children by marriage. There was also Eugene Bertrand, second matron, also an aunt to my children. And let me say to the Reverend Searcher, does it occur to him that such women have more at stake in their capacity as mothers for the well-being of society than he? Further, let me say that Miss Josephine Dingens, also a matron in costume at the German booth, who also is an aunt to my children, let me ask, does it ever, or did it ever occur to the Reverend that such a person whose piety and love of mankind are great and sincere, and whose deeds of charity and acts of kindness exceed his as 100 to 1, did it ever occur to him, cannot possibly scandalize the decent people of Buffalo? Dare he also insult such as she? I ask, whence came he? Huh, brilliant. And here he is the next year. He's the little placement in the paper where he is just against this Judge Stern for mayor of City of Buffalo. Never can we, as good and true men, by our votes, elect such a man to high and honorable position. Let me also say to my fellow countrymen of the fatherland that I should feel utterly mortified should I vote for such a man on the plea and upon the assumption that he is a descendant of German parentage. Ooh, brutal. Here he is doing a little philanthropy, and he is asking Mayor Jewett at the time for $5,000 to put together an operative to get the poor of the city of Buffalo to basically tend their own fields and grow potatoes. And it looks like it's a co-op. And over on the right, you see where where Mayor Jewett does give him the $5,000, and away they go. 1899, he becomes a little bit more vocal. Now, what happens here is that I think the malting business is difficult. This whole idea that it's easy now to get barley and hops and wheat from outside of the state, outside of the country for cheaper. And certainly what Christian was upset about was that brewers were using corn in place of in place of malting. And so he makes a statement publicly that all Buffalo brewers made impure beer. They used corn instead of quality malt because it was cheaper. And if anything else is used, the product is not beer, whatever the brewers may call it. So he basically, for some reason, he targets the Christian Weigh-In Brewing Company, and which I think is funny because he has a relative, Edwin, who is married to Emma Weigh-In. Just a small little side note there. And so basically the Weigh-In Brewing Company gathers up a couple other brewers. They throw $10,000 down on deposit with the German-American bank and saying anyone who can come and prove that they are producing impure beer can have the $10,000. So it also, Voltz also says that when they're selling a barrel of beer for $10, it's truly only costing them 44 cents to make. So he had a bit of, he was pretty vocal. And I just wanted to point out that information does come from Michael Rizzo's Buffalo Beer, The History of Brewing in the Nickel City. I'll put a link down below. It's an excellent book. I cannot recommend it enough. I owe a lot to Michael for teaching me how to research old stuff. And just if you were curious, that Christian Weigh-In Brewery, if you haven't noticed it and you're familiar with the city of Buffalo and you know the old Trico building downtown, you'll notice smack in the middle of it, they've built around it. But this sandstone, this Medina sandstone you see here, this is the original, what was the cold storage of the Weigh-In Brewing Company at the time. So if you haven't noticed that and you've driven by that Trico building a million times over, take a peek the next time you're around there. So this kind of dies out. No one really proves that there's impure beer. Christian kind of takes a different road. Side note here, because I have nothing in between, the next step in Christian's life is just wanted to point out that the maid did go insane. So this Miss Jenny Miller, she's out walking around Seneca and Swan. Cop comes up to her and says, "What have you lost?" And she says, "I've lost my husband. Don't you know where he is?" "Yes, he's in college, but I can't find him, and I've been looking for someone who will write to him." "What is his name?" "I don't know. He never told me." So, yep, that's the maid. And, okay, 1900 rolls around. Christian is a little upset about the paving of Massachusetts Avenue and Essex. And he doesn't like two things. He doesn't like the fact that they're using asphalt, the same asphalt that they just previously had paved with that has already broken up. Nothing's changed. The same thing going on in the city of Buffalo today. And the other thing he didn't like is that the contract did not go out for bid. So he did not like the city hall. He thought they were a bunch of gang. They were just a big gang. And they just fed the pockets of their friends. And so he wanders down to a common council meeting, wants to bring up this idea here. They don't want to hear it from him, and they conclude the meeting. He stands up, he causes a ruckus saying, "You're going to listen to me." Then you have a disgraceful scene in the common council chamber. Basically, they have to be, Christian and the aldermen of the common council have to be broken up. And so it settles down. These are great articles. I implore you to pause and you can read these. I'll put links down below so you can see this. These are real people. These are real things. And so Christian's walking out. And he's had enough. He puts his, he's got his umbrella in one hand, and he's got his overcoat in the other one. He rounds the corner outside the elevators at City Hall, and the alderman Sistorf, basically sucker punches him. And anyway, that's what happens. So this is another article. City clerk assaulted a citizen. Disgraceful scene at paving hearing again. This is the same thing. It's just zoomed in. Pause it. Give it a good read. It's good stuff. It's very interesting. Here's our brewing leader in the city of Buffalo. This guy's fantastic. And Mr. Voltz, he wants more. News reporter calls upon Mr. Voltz at the house, finds him in bed. And so Christian says, there'll be no police court business about this. I'm going to challenge this man to fight me. I shall write him a letter today or tomorrow in which he will be given an opportunity to choose his ground and to go into training. Let him fight from the shoulder. I will fight one at a time. This fellow first, and then perhaps Franklin. Sistorf is a coward, but he will have to fight. Excellent. Fantastic. Okay, 1901 rolls around. Now it's time for this guy to run for mayor. New name is C.G. Voltz. He runs on a 7-plank platform. And might you notice plank 3 is abolishing the board of aldermen. And so he was actually now he had a mission. He was going to eliminate that guy's job who sucker punched him. But he does have 6 other great ideas here. And so we see a great headline. This is the front page of the Buffalo Courier in May of 1901. And remember, this is a hot time in the city of Buffalo. This is the height of the warm weather of the Pan Am. And it's been going on for a couple months, so it's in full swing. And here's just a zoomed-in view here. The announcement of Christian G. Voltz that he is out to win the Democratic nomination for mayor has caused a wild stampede among the City Hall gang. A name that he called them. Some of them claim to see in his nomination sure election. The far-sighted and wise ones say Voltz would do things to the City Hall gang. Why, he might even become the people's idol. And in that case, he would be a logical candidate for governor, said one of the wise ones yesterday. He might become Buffalo's second Grover Cleveland. I'll be damned if he's not a spitting image of Grover Cleveland. Okay, so just a little bit more on his candidacy here. I like this one. He goes to some discussion at the Cold Spring Businessmen's Association, I assume over there on Main and Fillmore. People's ownership of public utilities. When he had finished, C.J. Hamelman attacked municipal ownership, but Mr. Voltz could not sit and listen to his pet doctrines, thus assaulted. Gentlemen, he exclaimed, jumping up suddenly, excuse me, I can't stand such rot as that. That fellow doesn't know what he's talking about. And Mr. Voltz left the hall. So, yeah, he just drops the mic and takes off. So, a little bit more. I'll give you a second if you want to pause it. And here he is telling you that you lop off that alderman position off the city payroll and you're going to save $25,000. And that was tied into the idea that they could give back to the teachers, to give our teachers more money. Mr. Voltz dropped into German poetry, which caused another gentle ripple and drew a mild protest from the chair. So, of course, yes, it is the Pan Am exposition that's happening in the city of Buffalo. And, of course, Christian's got an opinion here. And so basically what he doesn't like here is that the city of Buffalo, the taxpayers are paying for the overtime for the city of Buffalo police to run security at the Pan Am. And just another snippet from 1903. Here he is just imploring people to vote for his good friend, the Honorable Augustus Shue, certainly a relative of Jacob Shue, his fellow maltster and brewer of the old days. Here are the funeral plots for the Voltz family. And you'll see Christian dies in November of 1910. And his wife Mary dies in 1930, and daughter Laura Voltz dies in 1963. And this is just a the plots that are listed. Certainly there are other brothers and sisters that they had. Here's just a mention of the funeral. The funeral takes place in the parlor of the family home, and then the service at St. Louis Church does mention that he was a volunteer fireman. Those are their two headstones that can be found at Mount Calvary Cemetery in Buffalo. Just some odds and ends here. Here they are renting out 51 Essex. You had to go talk to them at 519 Massachusetts, selling some horse stuff. Here's that ad that I get the original quote from the beginning of this, where Christian posted, by sober, industrious, married man with large family, work tending lawns and cleaning carpets. There he is. Some more things in here, and then here you see in 1904, just to point out that they are living over there at 519, and just behind it at the barn, son Eugene, who is the clerk of the International Malt House, or CG&JS Voltz and Company in malting, and he is living on the second floor of the barn at 51 Essex. And that Eugene, the son of Christian, we'll see actually takes over the malting business. And just some things I found, a picture of, that's Josephine, that would be Mary's sister. That's her gravestone, her headstone. And then there is Anthony Diebold, there his headstone. And there is Sebastian. He is the father of Anthony Diebold. He's something else, that Sebastian. If you're coming here because you're looking for information on the Voltz family, or the Diebold family, or the Dingens family, or the Lutz family, shoot me a line. There's more information that I just don't touch on. Just a quick thing on John, his brother, though, great Civil War veteran, and he passes away in 1911. And again, Christian dies in 1910. John did leave 2 wills, and apparently there was a hubbub about that. He did sell, and this is just a quick ad of, barely legible, but he sells 935 Main on good, reasonable terms. Great for a grocery and a meat market. And here's a mysterious blaze on his house over there at Richmond. I wonder if they know that happened. And then just another one. This is actually pretty old. This furthest right here, the Buffalo Catholic Institute. This is a good one if anyone from the family is coming here. You'll notice that this is 1875, and here we see just some names. For example, that Miss Josephine Diebold, this would be Mary's sister. If you see the Diebold, notice how they spelled it with a D. And there you see Katie Diebold. And there you see Miss Josephine Dingens, and then another Diebold. Yeah. So just another different way of spelling it. You got to keep your eye out for that. So in 1913, again, Christian has passed away, so has John. Eugene, who was the accountant for the International Malt House, takes over the business. He does rename it to E.L. Voltz after putting it through bankruptcy. Actually just shortens it to the Voltz, or the Voltz Malting Company. But malting is terrible. The brewing industry is just falling apart. It's very difficult for a city that was really built and thrived upon the brewing industry. By the early 1900s, it's all falling apart. And sure enough, Eugene, again, he was the accountant, and son of Christian, he takes it over and turns it into a feed, hog feed, bakery waste. He's got all sorts of good stuff. He's selling walnuts out of the malt factory, Niagara. He's selling donkeys, horses. Here the Voltz family is selling their milk cow. They're looking to trade a milk cow for a fat butcher cow. And then a team of ponies. So that's the end of CG Voltz. Just a short glimpse on a great Buffalonian, German-American, proud brewer, community leader, volunteer fireman, politician, great family man who may have had a big mouth, but he was certainly well respected. And one other one I wanted to point out was there's a great story to his youngest brother, Felix. These are this is his handwriting. That is his infantry index card. Unfortunately, that is not his drum, but that is an authentic drum major drum from the Civil War era. Now, Felix was 18 years old. John, the older brother, basically gives him a little guff because he was late for getting ready for church, and Felix had enough. They must have had some other things. Certainly, it wasn't just this. He runs away. They don't hear from him for a few days. So these letters poignantly reveal the plight of a very ordinary soldier who endures homesickness, hunger, filthy conditions, lice, and being sunstruck. Voltz asks his brothers to ask his father's forgiveness for being ugly and to tell him that I have found out what a home is. So he basically he walks down to the arcade building downtown in Washington. And man, they sign him up immediately. And he eventually gets placed into the the 187th New York Volunteer Regiment, and he is a drum major as a private. And so these, I'll post a link to this. There are websites dedicated to Felix Voltz and these letters to Christian, to John, to the family, and they're fantastic. And I'll go through them, but if you notice, they do start, the second page, just so you know, is Felix's original letter. I don't know why the Library of Congress does that, but they start off with the second letter. The first letter is this one here that he mails out on January 30th of 1865. The long story short with Felix is that the family was upset. I don't think they felt that he was really cut for the Army. And they thought Christian was. And what they were hoping for is that if Felix had been drafted, then he could have deferred it to Christian, and they would have sent Christian off. But so they considered him that he was a fool for just rushing off to the Army, for not getting along, and he just felt out of place. And I think the family just thought he wasn't cut for it, and he didn't like the job he was given, the trade that the family had chosen for him. And so he does come home okay. The war ends within a year. And so the last letters are, my regards to all inquiring friends and relatives. Remember me to all in the family. Christ, yourself, Barbary, Lizzie, Willie, and father and mother. Good day, yours respectfully, dear brother John. P.S. Enclosed you will find a few lines which you will hand to mother. And so great letters here. He mentions a lot of friends, family members, neighbors. Very interesting. Again, I'll post a link down here. And that's it for my presentation on Christian G. Voltz, and certainly and company, and brother, and mother, and father. So if you're coming from the family or any of the families I've talked about, shoot me a message. And I just wanted to really give back to what I think is someone who almost got lost in history. And we have to keep this for posterity. And one of the things we did, I just like to point out selfishly, is that my wife and I had this talented artist, Jake, the sign guy here in the city of Buffalo, come and put this old-timey logo on the transom window to the back door of 51 Essex that you can see if you look down from 519 Massachusetts. It's wonderful. Okay, thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.